This right next to me is the Suzuki Jimny, and although it's been on sale for a couple of years now, there is still a 1-year waiting list, and that is strange because in many ways this is absolutely terrible. However, on a surface like this, it's very capable off the road, and it's also one of the best value four-wheel drives on the market right now. So in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the Jimny and even some of the key differences between the two variants. I'm also going to check out the interior and also see if there's a practical advantage going for the 5-door version. Then I'm going to see what it's like on the road and off the road. And finally, we're going to end on a verdict. Let's start off with a brief overview about the Jimny. So the whole range starts from $34,990 for the base model Lite, and that is drive away pricing that Suzuki has announced quite recently. But just bear in mind that is only for the manual version in a 3-door, whereas if you step up to the top spec version, which is called the Jimny, and in Queensland the GOX, that is priced from $36,490 drive away for the manual and $38,990 drive away for the auto. And of course, if you step up to the Jimny XL, which is the 5-door version, $39,490 is what you'll pay for the manual and $41,990 for the automatic. And stepping up to the Heritage Edition, which is also a manual, that will set you back $40,990. And in terms of rivals, I think the Jimny is the type of vehicle you should compare with the Jeep Wrangler, because that has a price tag of $75,000. And the next rival would be the Toyota Land Cruiser 70 series, which is pretty much double the price of the Jimny at $80,000. Right, moving on to the design. So the color of this car is finished off in jungle green, and if you don't like that color, there are 6 other external colors to pick from. And of course the 5-door is based on the top specification, so opposed to having halogen headlights, this top model grade variant features automatic projector LED lights, and you also get LED DRLs down the bottom, halogen turn signals on the side, and looking lower down, halogen fog lights. There's also a plastic bumper bar with a cooling intake for the mighty 75 kilowatt 1.5 litre engine. In addition to that, you also get headlight washers, which you can activate from inside the car. And the headlight design is very reminiscent of their original first generation Jimny, so therefore this car looks very cool and retro. And this grille mimics the design of the Mark III generation Jimny. And in terms of off-road specifications, this has 210mm of ground clearance and a front approach angle of 37 degrees. And now moving towards the side view of the 5-door Jimny. So as you can see, the length has grown 30 centimeters, but it is worth mentioning that the ramp over angle has decreased from 28 to 24 degrees. But of course, being based on the top specification, this features alloy wheels opposed to steel wheels, and they're also wrapped in highway terrain tyres opposed to all-terrains, disc brakes at the front and drum brakes at the rear. In addition to that, you also get plastic fender flares, black accented wing mirrors. You also get this unique design feature from the Mark II Jimny, and finally, no keyless entry, just normal traditional door locks. And moving towards the rear design of the Jimny, so your rear departure angle has decreased from 49 to 47 degrees, but aside from that, it is pretty much the same as the 3-door Jimny. So you get a plastic rear bumper bar with a halogen rear tail light cluster, a full-size 15-inch spare wheel at the back, and finally privacy glass on the third quarter. Let's now move on to the cabin. So before you climb inside, the Jimny features a basic remote key along with central locking, however no keyless entry. And in terms of the design, although it is simple, you do have some retro design elements such as this gauge cluster up the top here. And additionally, for 2024, you get a revised infotainment system. But aside from that, nothing else has changed since this generation Jimny first launched back in late 2018. So you still get hard, scratchy plastics on the doors. And that's also the same story on top of the dashboard. And when you look around this section here and looking towards the center, it's pretty much exposed, and you don't even get a center console or even an armrest, so it isn't the most comfortable cabin to sit in. And in regards to comfort, single zone climate control with physical dials and buttons. You also get manual adjustment for the seats that are wrapped in this fabric trim. And the steering wheel is also finished off in leather, again specific to the top specification. However, just keep in mind there's only tilt adjustment, not reach. That is just something worth pointing out. And if we move on to infotainment, it has been updated for the 24 model year, and although you've got touch sensitive icons here and some physical buttons on the steering wheel, it would be nice having a knob or a dial, and overall the menu layout is still basic. You can still cycle through different tabs here, and on the right hand side shows your fuel consumption. And in terms of key features, if I go into media, you've got AM, FM, DAB, Bluetooth and USB connectivity, along with a 4-speaker stereo system, which sounds okay. And you also have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And if we move on to safety and assistance, if I just flick it into reverse, you get a reversing camera along with these parking guidelines and rear parking sensors. And in addition to that, you also get autonomous emergency braking. And if we move over to the right hand side, you get standard cruise control on the manuals. However, for the automatics, they come with adaptive cruise control with a speed limiter. And there is also a lane keeping assistant, however, no ability to steer the car within its lane. And I think that is a good thing. And finally, you get hill start assist. And if we look right in front of me, you've got an analog gauge cluster. Again, like I mentioned, it is a retro themed cluster, along with a tiny display in the center showing information like fuel consumption, range, driving time. So overall, fairly basic. And moving on to off-road features, you've got a four-wheel drive selected down the bottom here. So two-wheel drive high range for unsealed surfaces, and four-wheel drive high range and low range for unsealed surfaces. And finally, this button here is to activate the hill descent control. And finally, moving on to storage. So you get small little door pockets that don't really fit anything. And the glove box is also quite small, as it only fits the big chunky owner's manual. And towards the center, you've got two small cup holders that can fit two coffee cups. There is absolutely nowhere to put your phone, even though you've got this slot here. But aside from that, over here you get a 12-volt socket and a USB-A port. You can place your phone up there, but that could quite easily slide off. You've got a big giant grab handle, and aside from that, that's pretty much it. Okay, moving on to the back seat. So what exactly is the practical advantage that you're getting? Well, firstly, there's an extra set of doors, so climbing inside is much easier in comparison to the free door. The wheelbase is also longer, so you get extra knee room, toe room, and headroom is pretty good as well. Not the most comfortable back seats that I've ever sat in, because it is worth pointing out that there are only 2 seats opposed to 3. But aside from that, there are 2 top tether points on the seat backs, opposed to them being on the floor like what is on the 3-door version. And in addition to that, there are mat pockets behind the front seats. And finally, these 2 outboard seats are ISOFIX compatible. Let's now move on to boot space. So if I just open up the side swinging tailgate, which can be a bit annoying at times, not only in tight parking spaces. I did park the Jimny on an angle and I couldn't open the door. But aside from that, in comparison with the 3-door version of the Jimny, this has 211 litres of boot capacity, whereas the 3-door version has 85 litres. In addition to that, there is also a light on the left-hand side, along with a 12-volt socket. And if we look underneath the floor, that is the location for the jack and spare toolkit. And you can also quite easily drop down the second row, giving you just over 1100 litres, whereas the 3-door version has 830 litres. Let's now move on to the powertrain. So under the bonnet features a 1.5 litre non-turbocharged engine, and the powertrain produces 75 kilowatts and 130 newton meters of torque. And this particular version is paired to a 5-speed manual. And in terms of what you're getting in regards to off-road specifications, the Jimny sits on a ladder frame chassis. It also features selectable four-wheel drive, hill hold control, hill descent control, LSD braking to reduce slip, rigid axle suspension with a coil spring setup, along with All Grip Pro, which is an off-road specific traction control. And in terms of the ownership, you get a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty, along with a 5-year 100,000 kilometre cap price servicing plan, and finally 5 years of roadside assistance. And in terms of fuel consumption, 6.4 litres for the manual and 6.9 litres for the automatic. So with all the specs out of the way, let's now take it out for a drive. Okay, moving on to the driving impressions. So first up, visibility. I can clearly see what's in front of me. I've also got good side vision, decent sized wing mirrors, and visibility from the back is also pretty good. Now, in terms of the driving experience, I've actually lived with the Jimny for about a week now, driving it around the CBD, the suburbs, and even around the countryside like what I'm doing now. There are some compromises when it comes to refinement. As you can see with the camera footage, it is rigid in terms of how it feels, and it is bumpy. In comparison with the 3-door version, this 5-door version of the Jimny does have a longer footprint, so you do feel a little bit more planted as you would in comparison with the standard Jimny. And in terms of how this drives on the open road, look, I did take this down on the freeway and my elbow was resting on that hard plastic on the door, so overall not the most comfortable car to travel around in. It is a little bit noisy in the cabin and you do hear a lot of that road noise, especially at lower speeds. I think to really appreciate this car is its off-road capability. You just got to remember this car was built for a purpose. And in terms of the transmission, yes, it is a 5-speed manual, but it's not the most engaging gearbox I've ever come across. I wouldn't describe it as being a fun car to drive, but definitely a car that offers a lot of character. And although the steering has a nice light feel about it, it would be nicer if maybe the steering ratio was a bit shorter. And in terms of fuel consumption, I'm currently averaging around 12 litres per 100. I did get it down to 11 litres, shifting gears a little bit sooner to keep it down on the rev range. However, when I took it down to barrel on the freeway, I was sitting on 13 litres per 100, and I expected something a bit better. Would have been nice to have maybe a 6th gear, because yeah, you do sit on 3 to 3.5 RPM. And in saying that, on the freeway, yeah, climbing past 100 to 110, just doing the odd overtaking here and there into the right lane, you know, around that speed, this car does run out of puff. And now we're going to perform a 0 to 100. So I'm in 1st gear, 2nd, 50, 70, 80, 90 into 3rd, 100, and 4th gear. So yeah, as you can see, it's not the quickest car that you'll ever drive. Okay, let's do a little bit of light off-roading in the Jimny. Now, I'm not going to activate the hill descent control or do any mountain climbing. I'm just going on an off-road dirt trail, which for me and my experience is good enough, and I'm sure that there are a lot of great off-road videos about the Jimny. This was just to get an idea on where the Jimny feels at home. And of course, it's not as capable as a Land Cruiser because you don't have front and rear diff locks. It's not as big nor as powerful. But in regards to how this performs off-road, it's a lot of fun, especially on these dirt tracks. And because this is a smaller car, it's a lot more nimble when you need to point it, I guess, away from a big giant pothole or a big rock. You can see what the front wheels are doing. You've got a good sense of direction. Unless if you're specifically going to use the car for off-road driving or driving around gravel, muddy terrains, or even rocks, then the Jimny isn't right for you. So as a bit of a wrap up, if you're wanting something off-road capable, a little bit playful and characterful, well, value for money, it doesn't really get better than this. So with my driving impressions out of the way, let's now wrap up with a verdict. So what is my final verdict on the Suzuki Jimny? Well, in comparison to the 3-door version, this 5-door is a lot more spacious, but it's still a 4-seater. And in terms of an overall verdict on the Jimny, yes, it isn't spacious, it isn't practical, it isn't up to date in terms of tech, and it's certainly not refined. But although this is nearly as capable as a 70 series Land Cruiser, well, almost. Let's not forget, it is priced under $40,000, and in terms of value for money, for a 4-wheel drive, that is excellent value. But as always, let me know what you think of my verdict down in the comment section below, and which variant of the Jimny would you go for? 3-door, 5-door, manual or auto? You let me know in the comment section down below. But as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next film.